This is MC Fireside Chats, a weekly show devoted to the outdoor hospitality industry, hosted by Brian Searl and Cara Csizmadia. You'll hear from special guests that focus on topics to help your business succeed, all backed by Modern Campground, the most innovative news source in the industry.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MC Fireside Chats. My name is Brian Searl with Insider Perks, here as always with Cara Csizmadia from the Canadian Camping and RV Council. We're super excited to present our open discussion show. Happens the first week of every month. We're excited to welcome back Mr. Randy Hendrickson, Mark Koep, Sandy Ellingson, and Ruben Martinez, who has been missing for a few months, but that's apparently my fault because he's got 7 email addresses and I was always sending it to the wrong one. So super excited to have Ruben back, and Mr. Cochran, I believe, is going to be joining us here a little bit later in the show. He's just tied up for the first half of it. And we've got a really cool announcement that we're not going to make yet, but that might happen next week with Ruben. So stay tuned for that. So we might have something interesting to share with you next week on the show. But beyond that, let's start off today kind of as we usually do with our open discussion. Normally I would toss it to all of you guys, but I want to take the lead here and just prompt a conversation that is a little bit dangerous, but I'm going to wade into the waters here first and say that. And let's briefly talk about consistency. And so and this is just my opinion, to be clear, but consistency when it comes to campgrounds, the experience that people have, their expectations when they come to a park, like this is, in my mind, really important for a KOA or a franchise or a Yogi Bear park. When you are a loyal KOA camper, you come and you expect, the branding of the holidays or the journeys or the resorts. You expect that there will be certain amenities and that the sites will be designed a certain way, and the level of customer service and quality will be there. But I don't feel like that approach is a blanket statement for the entire industry, right? I think that, as we've discussed on this show many times before, there are a lot of different operators. There are a lot of different consumers. There are a lot of people coming in from hotels into glamping, as Ruben can certainly talk about. And these customers have different expectations, and they don't always want, some of them do, but they don't always want the same type of experience. And so yesterday, was it, Mark? It was announced that National RVIC, the National Association, is coming out with this task force that has a lot of intelligent, amazing, super smart people on it that have been in the industry for a long time. A lot of respect for the people on there. But I'm not so sure that this is the right direction for the industry from a small operator. And we've seen that a little bit in your group, Mark, with some comments on a post that you made. I'm not so sure that we need a set of standards that should be exactly the same for everybody in the industry. I think there's a lot of room to innovate and a lot of room to change and a lot of room to do different things different ways. And I think maybe there's a place for a minimum quality standard, but I don't know if there's a place for a standard across everything. So I just wanted to open it up, throw myself under the bus there and into that kind of feisty little discussion. Take it away if anybody wants to pick it up. I'm sure Mr. Hendrickson has some thoughts. Or Mark, do you want to start just why you...
Yeah, I'll jump in. So Ben from Woodall's Campground Management, he posted that story, and I picked it up and posted it on the Facebook group. And what stuck out to me, it's if they're going to do standards, whatever, that's a conversation. And as you mentioned, the people that are on that board are some amazing folks. We know many of them, right? But what caught my eye is the release claim that they represented, they being ARVC, represented 13,000 park owners in the United States. And that's just factually untrue. It's factually untrue. There are a large number of very large states who have said to ARVC, hey, we like what you're doing. We're not going to be a part of it. And there's a large number of parks within those states who are no longer members of ARVC for various reasons, whatever those reasons are. So where my first issue comes in is that we need a strong national association of campgrounds and RV parks in the United States to represent the interests of the owners and the industry at that level. We currently, this is going to raise ruffle some feathers here, we currently do not have a strong national association for obvious reasons. The big states are not members of it, therefore it's no longer a national association. And so that's where I kind of said, wait a second, this release is incorrect. Now, it could just be a misquote, and maybe they misstated. They went from 3,000 to 13,000. I mean, just add 10,000 onto it magically. That could be it. But that was what immediately caught my eye. The other thing that you kind of mentioned is the release stated that they're going to be working on voluntary standards for various types of operations. And immediately what the owners within the Facebook group noted is that they're small park owners. They don't have the time, energy, or money to follow certain standards. So what exactly is going to come out of that? The group may decide, the folks that are on this group may decide that that's the case. Most of the park owners won't be able to follow any standards they lay out. So they'll just have sort of guidelines that they list as this is what an RV park is, this is what an RV resort is, this is what a campground is. The problem is you start going down that route, the big question that comes to my mind is why? Why do we need this task force? What's the purpose of it? Is there some organization that's trying to help with weigh in that they're trying to muscle out? What's going on here? Why is there the task force in the first place? Now, I don't know it. I'm not involved in the conversation, not involved with the ARVC. Don't know that, but that was why I posted the article and why it caught my eye in the first place.
Well, so I think my concern, just to follow up on your comment before I let everybody else jump in if they want to, I think Sandy will have some comments and Randy might, and Ruben, feel free to jump into the fire if you want to too. We're not going to talk about this the whole show, but one of the things that concerns me is, let's say you come out with this.
Oops. Nope, I've lost Brian.
Brian?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, we all have. He's frozen. Okay, well, I'm going to jump in while we wait for him to come back, and I guess maybe just say I completely agree with Mark. I would love to hear kind of the thought process behind why this is happening, and maybe we can get some insights from somebody at ARVIC at some point. But I, as a former operator of a small park, a small business, I can see the perspective of those specific individuals, and you know, I was saying before we jumped on, I'm out of the loop. I'm not as informed maybe on what they're doing, but I was just kind of scrolling through the post on Facebook and checking out the comments. It is concerning. It's concerning to kind of put this list of standards together. Who gets to decide what those are, and what kind of impact does that have? I mean, the idea that a group of individuals should get to decide what kinds of camping experiences are available, I think is seriously concerning for the industry. One of our biggest strengths is our adaptability, and it's quite a necessity because of how different all of these parks are, and that's a product of their different locations and their different proximities to different amenities, and so many different factors that I think applying a base set of standards to them all is going to be, frankly, really, really tough, in my opinion. I can't see how it's achievable, not without seriously impacting the outliers at the ends of the bell curves, the really small guys.
And
Yeah.
I totally agree with you too, Mark. And I just applaud you for being willing to actually bring the topic up, because it is kind of a hot potato. But I am a firm believer that if we're going to talk about standardization, let's just say it's about safety and security, that needs to be at the state level. There are too many differences state to state to try and cover that at a national level. And so if there was a task force, it should be a task force at the state level, run by the states, and then that information possibly shared with the national organization. I also totally agree with you, Mark, that we do need great national representation, and it needs to be national representation that works for the state associations and for what's best for them, and that parks should be a part of their state association, not have to pay for a national association membership. And there are ways of doing that, generating the revenue for it and still making it profitable for both the parks and the national association. It's something I've been very vocal about in the past several months, because some of these conversations have been being had prior to the public announcement. And so there are already a lot of parks extremely upset about what they perceive as happening. And I don't know if they have the right perception or not, because I don't know that anybody does. I don't even know if the existing task force has the right perception. So yeah, that concerns me too.
Yeah, back where my red flags really go up is back during COVID. I'm going back in time a little bit. If you remember, in the heart of it, there was the idea that there were these businesses that could be open or not open, basically essential businesses, right? And so there was a fear that there was this push to shut down some campgrounds and RV parks. And where I go back to a moment in time when the National Association put out a document that said that RV parks and campgrounds could remain open, but they just had to tear down their gym equipment, physically remove their gym equipment from the property, and then they would be operating appropriately. And at that time, I was a participating vendor within the organization. I raised my hand and said, "Hey, who said this idea? Like, where did this come from?" And that was actually distributed. Luckily, none of the state powers that be picked up that document and tried to implement it, because good God, could you imagine RV parks and campgrounds being forced to tear down their gym equipment? Point being is those are the unintended consequences of big national decisions being made. And so again, that's just why I raised my hand. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying why, number one, why, and number two, what's I guess it's the same question. Why and what's the purpose of it?
Yeah.
And my quick two cents here. I know that a little bit comparing apples to oranges, but from the glamping industry, we actually started from the American Glamping Association. There was big calls at the very beginning. The reason for the association was for standardization, right? That was the big calls. We need a star system like the hotels. We need health and safety and all that. And we looked into that really aggressively, and it was very clear that it was going to be a very hard pathway forward to be a policing agency versus tools, resources, education, and assistance. I mean, we looked at the rating, we looked at, defining different types of categories of accommodation, and every pathway that we looked down was like, this really changes the makeup of the organization as a whole and what we stand for. Instead of us saying, hey, looks like you're a little bit far away from where you need to be, let's help you. It was turning into, well, now you're 3 stars instead of 5 stars, or now you're in trouble and now you're not, and there was a big disconnect on what we were trying to accomplish and where we wanted to be versus what that standardization was. And there was also a significant amount of complications of enforcing, right? It's one thing to define and standardize, but then how do you enforce in a way that's actually good for the industry, which we just couldn't wrap our heads around. Maybe within this, maybe there is something there for enforcing that I just can't see, but those were the things that really stood out for us, was not only the characterization of what an association should be and who they should be serving, but then what's that intersection of reality, right? Because it's one thing to have a plan. It's one thing to try and roll out that plan, but then how do you actually enforce it in a way that's good for the industry? We just couldn't wrap our heads around. And very early we said, okay, people wanted that, but we're going in a different direction.
It's mind-blowing to me that, yeah, Brandy, we're probably going to go the same place. Go.
But Ruben, that's something that kind of strikes me about this ARVIC task force. Structurally, I think to myself, have a task force, it should have a objective. What is the outcome of the task force? What are the conclusions you hope to come to? If it's an altruistic task force, which arguably it is, there's some good horsepower, then when we emerge with this set of standards and practices, what's the goal? Well, if you're 70 side, I got a 70 side park, Texas. So if the stand come down from ARVIC, say I should be doing X, Y, and Z, and that's not feasible for me, did I any benefit at all from that survey? Did it change the way I do this? It arguably does not. So there's altruism present with the notion as far as specific applicability. I think that's kind of what is the juice. Now I've got this should be doing. It doesn't really change life too much, for the park and campground industry, but it also speaks to something. I've been board for 17 years, so I've got to live on both sides, the ARVIC side, the state side, like that. And to me, it kind of comes down to a couple basic precepts. One, you need a national association. Mark, I couldn't agree more. You need a strong national association. States that don't have a state association, and a national is really their only resource where they go for any kind of advocacy for their business or what have you. National association. What I found in practical application, if you own that small park and you're choosing to join the national, or the state. There's two ways of thinking. The first is defensive. If you're a small park, your defensive position is, what are the regulations that affect me? What are the regulations? What pending legislation might there be? Who's watching that for me? Can't do that myself. Your state is going to be hyper dialed in to affect you on a state basis for those campgrounds. That's the immediate opposition. Nationally, you can argue, yes, there's a lot of advocacy basis. Does it apply to my daily life? Maybe not so much. I'm glad they're doing it. If I have two checks to write, one to support the national and one to support the state, I'll probably write that check in my own backyard in my state, because they're watching. That's not a slam against national. They can't burn in every state, but the states can do that. So those are some calculations. A small park operator goes, I've got X amount of dollars. Where's it best spent? And it's usually, I'm going to cover my butt. States do that arguably better than national can. Again, not by default, design.
Right. I think from an association perspective, I'll agree with Randy. I am in the same boat where I'm executive director of a provincial association. Then I work for the National Association in a member services capacity. So I have experience kind of both of those levels. And certainly I think our fundamental structure is different here in Canada compared to the States, where, you know, when I get a new member inquiry for the National Association, I direct them to the provincial association to join. The members, the National Association's members are the provincial associations. It's formatted that way so that their members receive all of the national benefits, but our members are actually the individual provincial associations. And I think that is beneficial specifically to an operator, because now you're getting that support at both levels necessary. You know, we can, for vendors and things that have national level coverage, we can offer that benefit at the national level, and everyone in all of the provinces gets it. Some of our vendors are only in certain provinces, and so they, you know, there's fundamental day-to-day stuff that impacts those things that makes it streamlined. But I think this idea that we have to, that it doesn't make sense to me to kind of have this dual stream of association setup, given that a lot of the kind of day-to-day necessity stuff is repetitive. We can be working together and not reinventing the wheel and not doing stuff over and over. And I would have a hard time, I think, getting the board here to agree on walking down this road. I love what Ruben said about, you know, taking this position in kind of a positive way, where instead of this policing kind of almost punishment, whatever scenario, you have this motivational thing that essentially kind of pushes the market to push operators to perform in a certain way instead of some governing body. You know,
right.
Consumers set expectations.
And what I'll add to that, Cara, is part of the release said that these will be voluntary guidelines. And so that would be the out. Is, they're going to be voluntary. Nobody can follow it. But then it's mentioned that it'll also be like the NFPA. And anybody who's ever built a park knows that you go into an area, you go to zoning, you say, there's these guidelines to NFPA. Well, if that local county looks up and sees, there's also national guidelines now, are you building your park to the national guidelines too? And now you're potentially creating a scenario where down the road, future developers have increased cost of development because whatever's on that document that is required, they didn't plan on doing it. Now they have to do it, and they have to build that into their business plan. So if it's discounted by saying it's voluntary, I would argue against that. If an association like this is putting out any sort of guidelines, again, I refer back to the COVID thing. When a national association puts out that you need to tear down your playground equipment, good God, thank God nobody picked up that document and read it. So, this could be the same case here.
Yeah. And the thing that scares me is anything political always starts out as voluntary. And you know that down the road, it's suddenly going to become, now it's a requirement. And because it's a requirement, now you're also required to be a member of the organization. And so it just snowballs. And I think they may have had some good motives when they started doing this, but even the way you communicated, if they'd come out to the parks and said, hey, we've learned so much from COVID. We had campers who were confused by the name. Is it a park? Is it a resort? We want to create some standardized language around what we call our parks. How can we come alongside and help you? How can we help you with this? The reaction, I think, would have been totally different than to call it a task force to go out and establish some of the things that they've said they want to do.
Do we have a sense that those are their intentions, that the things that Sandy's mentioning, or we don't know any of that yet?
I don't think we know any of that yet as a fact.
Right.
Yeah, all we know is what's in the release.
Right.
Yeah, my sense from an altruistic place that they want to provide some sort of the people that may need it. I can't fault the intention of the goal to provide some kind of direction and standards. I can't fault that at all. And I'm not trying to poke holes in them, but the one thing I come back again is, what is the applicability of what's done? My sense is it's going to be read and discarded, and it won't be the thing to say, am I still doing best practices? It'll be a one-time thing. The task force will be disbanded, and what have we done? So again, the altruism, I just don't know how applicable it is to every campground owner.
Yeah, and I totally love what Ruben said, and I thought that was so relevant that they went through and did the due diligence to get to the point where they thought this might not be the best thing, because ultimately you do become, the police, and that's never a place that you want to be, where you've got to oversee and do that. It's expensive. It's not friendly, and I just really hope that they'll take a step back and look at that and take some advice from some other people. Maybe they'll see the podcast and consider that.
I guess maybe this is a question we don't have answers to either, but does anyone foresee them doing that, taking some consultation from stakeholders that smaller parks and things, a variety of stakeholders, to get more input on how this will go? Or are we full steam ahead and it's done and decided?
I would have if I had to guess, I would guess that this broadcast right here is about to light up a massive little fire. And I would think that a responsible result would be exactly that: reach out to more stakeholders and maybe draw together. Again, the folks that are named on that task force are amazing. They know our industry inside and out. So it's not a knock on them. It's just back to Randy's statement. Why? Why are we doing this? And maybe they kind of relook at that and ask not only the why, but what is the outcome? Again, to Randy's point, is it a good document that's just discarded, or is this going to be something that's going to be put into practice? So that way there's some real tangible results from it.
So, well, I'm fascinated by this whole thing. I was saying earlier I should spend more time on Facebook so I'm not blindsided by this stuff. Yeah.
If I may, there's one more element to this. And again, maybe this is just my institutional thinking to some degree, but in terms of like a state board will go through a vision process. Many boards go through a vision process, and they'll kind of determine who are we, what are we doing, what are our objectives, and what's the goal. And then if it's done properly, revisit the following year and saying, we apply, what did we learn, and how do we read that going forward? If a benchmark and a measuring stick, these are the industry best practices and standards we've determined. Let's go back and revisit next year what's changed in that time about how the industry has pivoted. Then it becomes a resource that you can kind of see the end of looking at this differently or that differently. I'm not saying keep the task force for impunity till we all leave this planet. I'm not saying that by any stretch either, but it goes back to deliverables, and I don't know that this does that in its present form.
So is it possible that we're knee-jerking and we need to for more measured, calculated communications?
Can you guys?
Well,
can you guys hear
I
me?
will blame Brian, who started the conversation and then left during the whole thing. And now
Yes.
I didn't want any feedback. I just wanted to give my opinion. Like, my entire internet went out. I tried 2 phone hotspots. Like, none of my Wi-Fi things were working. and then it wouldn't reconnect in here. So I don't know. Somehow I'm back, but
Here he is.
I'm
Like
going
it
to
is-
pose
it
an
is-
incendiary question that disappeared too. That was kind of cool, Brian. Just post up
Yeah,
the
he
fire
just
over
try
there.
that more.
Hold the grenade pin and toss it.
That's
I
right.
don't even remember what I was saying, but the thing is we could be, and I was watching a little bit of you guys on while I was trying to figure it out. Like I could watch, I just couldn't join the stream again, and so I heard a little bit of your conversation. But I think you're like, it's possible that we are overreacting, that we're, we don't have all the facts. I think, from my perspective, just coming from a modern campground side, Arvik doesn't communicate with us. They don't send us releases. They don't respond to our emails. And so we struggle to get some of this information. And then what's left is speculation.
Right.
We'd love to have their side of the story, but we've been unable to get them to communicate with us on a regular basis.
But I think what's super interesting, though, looking at it from a bit of the outside, is that what this has shown is that it is an important topic to people, right? The fact that a little bit has gotten out there and the fact that there's been a reaction like this just shows how, important, how maybe volatile the topic can be, and that it is important, that it should be front and center. I think, the other part that really comes to mind is that think of how much the outdoor industry has changed in the last 2 or 3 years, right? And from a national level, it doesn't matter, who you are. I think I wouldn't call it a danger, but the thing that you have to always be careful about is what we're doing and what we're implementing allowing for pivots and change and growth within the industry, or by doing X, Y, and Z, are we really hurting the industry? And that's a tough question. And since we don't have all the answers from exactly what they would define as that standardization, but I'd imagine the next 5 years, there's going to be significant change. I mean, the amount of parks that have, different mixed usage, the investment that's going into all sorts of, campground, RV park, glamping, everything is changing so rapidly that it's almost like, you're trying to put a piece of yarn around an ever expanding building, right? Like it's just never going to hold. You almost have to let it grow in a way and kind of deflect and allow for that growth to happen. So I think that would be one of the fundamental questions that I see and hear is whatever is going to happen going to allow for that growth to continue to happen, and unpredictable growth, right? Nobody can sit here and say, first of all, and I know exactly what's going to.
Yeah, totally. That's my biggest concern is do we then hinder that organic kind of the nature of this industry and how it, and I think again going back to that same thing where it's so adaptable and that's part of its nature. Are we risking hindering that organic growth and shifting and things that are kind of dictated by the market when we go down a path like this?
And one of the things too is that if you look at the group that's on the task force, they're all members of multi-park systems. And so standardization is already a part of their everyday norm. I don't see anybody on there that's the little mom and pop that's on that task force representing that group, which is a huge group of parks still. Even with all the aggregation that's going on, there is still a huge number of small mom and pops. And I would love to see them represented on the task force.
Agreed.
Do we have a sense of, and maybe Randy, this because you're getting into a little bit of the hotel space. I wish we had Mike on here who used to work for Marriott. He's on our, one of our other week calls. But do we have a sense of, does this exist in the hotel industry? Like, I feel like it doesn't. Because they're, again, Hyatt, Marriott, IHG have their standards divided by different branding and different standards across those brands, much like KOA has their standards, and I'm sure Jellystone has their standards. But is there somebody who's attempting to say and define what a standard hotel room is for the entire industry? I feel like I've never seen that, and it would never work.
There probably is. If there is, I'm good. I think the difference is, hotel motels, as you said, got very established with this brand with very rigid procedures. Don't have the outdoor hospitality industry yet. Ruben,
yeah, good.
Right, not yet. Coming. Ruben might have a better sense than I about the hotel space, actually.
No, that's a good question. I know that there is a level of standardization, but when you think about it, it's evolved over a very, very long period of time, right? So as I look at what we do in glamping, where we have a limited amount of data and information because it's something that's a bit more, in recent, right? RVs and campgrounds have a lot more data and a lot more history, and then hotels after that have even more data, history, standards. So I think the key difference is, I'm certain that there's something that is there when it comes to building development and items like that, but it's also evolved to over a long period of time, and there isn't as much versatility to it, right? When you think a hotel is a hotel is a hotel, right? When you think of it from a development standpoint, an RV park that's in upstate California or a campground that's in southern Florida, there's wildly different development needs, from size to market to scope to, is there food and beverage? Maybe yes or no. Swimming pool, yes or no. On-site activities. Where hotels, I think whatever standardization does exist, it allows for it because it's a bit more of a cookie cutter approach, right? It is that brick and mortar, and there isn't that need for versatility, where a campground, an RV park, a glamp ground, it's really hard to shove them into, several boxes, let alone one box that actually doesn't cause more problems down the road. I think from a hotel standpoint, yes, you're metropolitan, you're in the city, here's what you need to do, kind of live with most of this, and then you can kind of do your own thing. Can you take that stamp it and say, great, this is good in Florida and Montana, and whether you're an RV park or resort or glamp ground or mixed usage? I don't think so, right? And I think that might be the key difference.
And we'll be fair to Arvik and say, like, it's possible that they've thought all this through. It's possible that the standards that they're going to come up with are going to be regional, or north, south, east, west, or California versus Montana. They could be working on those things, but if they are, then maybe they should communicate that, either through further releases or announcements, or talking to those independent park owners, because there is good that can come of this. It just depends on how you approach it and how you frame it. And unfortunately, we're just kind of speculating here because we don't have anybody from National RVIC who's willing to speak to it.
Yeah. Well, and regardless, Brian, I think addressing that small mom and pop portion that's missing is a necessity. If I were a member of that association and saw the list of task force participants as a mom and pop park owner, I would express the expectation that my sector of the market was able to have a voice there.
Go ahead, Randy. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Brian, you just said a mouth there, and I think it kind of speaks to the heart matter. The reason we're all assembled here talking about this in a kind of a theme is because of the absence of information or communication methodology and the direction of this task force, right? If it was articulated, easy to be a Monday morning quarterback, but if it said the goal is this, we expect to extract this, the deliverable is this, our intention is this, we're not going to do your stuff and just provide industry best we gathered from this sample for you to apply, and these are why we people for these specific things. If I read that, then I understand it, and nothing about it today. But in the absence of that, it was just kind of like a bunching together, and they're going to be doing this task force, and the rest of us are thinking, well, what about the small park over here? What am I supposed to do with it? Communication, addressing the deliverable, I think, is what's absent, right?
Well, and that's part of the reason I chose to address it today and start off the conversation that way, is because I know from doing reviews, right, for parks for over 10 years, that 95% of people don't leave their feedback anywhere that you can find it. Only 5% do. And I feel like that's probably the same with Mark's group and the post he put out. And so I feel like the pattern there was, what's happening? What's going on? What's this going to go? Is it more regulations? What are the ramifications of this? I feel like there's a whole larger group of people who don't comment that probably have the same questions.
Do you guys think that there's no regulation? I'll go ahead, Randy. I was going to say, I mean, like from the list of names that they've had on there, participating in that, I mean, a couple of the owners of those parks I know, fairly well, and I know they started with fairly humble roots, right? I mean, they started with a campground and they've grown them over time And I would think, again, knowing a couple of these personally, I think they would sympathize with this conversation. I think they'd sympathize with the fact that this is where almost every campground owner until recently has come from. They started with 25 or 50 sites, and they've grown over time. They've bought more land over time, and of course you have some larger sectors coming in and wanting all of that and more land to continue, which is fine. But I would probably give the benefit of the doubt that that they understand that industry. When you talk about the changeover of larger groups coming in, I mean, it is so far down there. As fast as that is happening, I mean, you're talking tens of thousands of parks that still need to be acquired for that to for that shift to happen. So, I mean, the large corporate may own 7 to 9% of the inventory now, maybe. I mean, there's still so much left that would need to be bought out in such a short period of time for that. I think for the majority to be that way. And so to me, there could be some encouraging that those owners that are coming from some of those more humble roots of where they built their campground, I would hope would have the best interest for those smaller parks. We would hope so, anyways.
Well, and that goes back to I led off the show by saying that I have a lot of respect for everybody who's been nominated and who's a part of that task force. And you're right, Casey. I think they do have, at least some of them probably have the best, but we don't know. Nobody's communicating with us, and nobody's saying, like, who is the decision maker? Is it equal vote? Is it a democracy? Is it, ultimately Arvik is going to overrule and decide whatever they want? Like, we just need some communication and some understanding. Because I think you're right, but I don't know.
Sure.
Or I hope you're right, maybe.
Well,
one of the
a lot of the feedback in Mark's group really brings us to bear, because campground owners that are in that thread that had some pretty strong about how they view this. But again, in the absence of information, there's speculation. When sometimes you assume the worst. This could be the best thing that's happened in the millennium. For all we know, we just don't know what it is and why they're doing it. Right, and that's the part. Your thread was very enlightening, because if that's the perception, right?
And to that, Randy, I was actually surprised at the responses a little bit, that they were so in the tone and manner in which they were. And again, the whole reason I posted it is obviously it's important. I thought people should know that was happening. And then number two, the claim in the release. Again, I go back to that number. It claimed that they represented 13,000 campgrounds. And if you're going in, if that's the goal, if that's the thought pattern that you actually represent 13,000 campgrounds, you're going to make decisions based upon that. I want to make it clear. ARVC does not represent 13,000 campgrounds in the United States. They don't. Flat out don't. So that was my big call to action there, and that was again, the responses to that post were not positive. They were some were hopeful, but most of them were pretty negative, and kind of echoed what Cara said about hey, there's no small park owners on this.
Yeah. Right, and again, it's perception, and so I feel like that's what's lacking here. Is National Arvik does have an opportunity to come out and clarify this. They did have an opportunity to word their press release different. Like, I'm happy to talk to them and give them a voice and give them, share their thoughts. And maybe we are wrong, but I can't make them communicate with us, or make them communicate with owners, or make them communicate better.
Well, I think they're the obvious reaction from people on Mark's post, and probably, I'm sure it's not the only place that they're hearing that stuff, will be a good motivator for them to address the questions coming out. I think the press release came out yesterday, no?
Yes.
I think 2 days ago.
Oh, 2 days ago? Okay.
Okay, well, give them some time to formulate the language.
There's a pause out of all this stuff. I mean, with my businesses, if somebody says, gee, Randy, you're up in the clouds again, that may be the single dumb idea I have heard in my lifetime. I'm really happy to hear it, because, like, okay, getting the reality check, that's what I need. If I'm Arvik, I hope I'm Waco, and the takeaway is not we're trying to tear them down to their rafters, where you have a perception issue and a messaging issue, and I hope they would see constructive and helpful and beneficial crucial to the crafting their future messages and reaching constructive manner and defining their objectives better. So this is not let's slam. It's about, hey, we want to help. So are you hearing us? Mark's group.
Right. And I think I hope that's very clear that that's the intention. Like, we just need to hear from them and hear their side. And our intention is not to say we're right. Like, what we're saying here might not be right. We certainly don't speak for the industry either. But we've seen a difference of opinions in the Facebook group. We've obviously got our own opinions here. We've seen what Arvik's opinions are, at least the very limited, opinions that are stated in the press release or facts. And so we just need to bring those ideas together and maybe not decide for the entire industry, but figure out a path forward that it is inclusive of everyone's opinion.
Yeah, I think it's valuable to set reasonable expectations in kind of any sort of relationship. And so communicating them is a necessity. I did get the sense from some of those posts that you would do as a business owner, you kind of immediately go, how's this going to impact me? How should I react to this? Here's my gut instinct stuff. And yeah, it needs addressing for sure.
All right. We spent 41 minutes and 19, 20, 21 seconds on that. So what else is on your desk? Let's pivot away from that for a second. What else has come across your desk in the last month or so since we've had a chance to connect? I know Casey's been missing from the show for a couple times. He's been busy. But anybody else have anything that they feel is relevant and should be brought up here?
Well, I wanted to, if I could jump in. So if you remember, I've had previous conversations about the rising fuel prices, impacts of inflation on travel. We're now far enough in where we're actually seeing the outcome of these changes. And the consumers have changed significantly. Their travel trends, obviously staying closer to home, not going on the longer distance journeys. But what's very rewarding for our industry is that people are still traveling. They're still camping. The campgrounds in general are doing well. Now, there are some parks that are still struggling, that are along those long distance routes or far away from population centers. Those parks are definitely feeling it. But the good trend is that we are seeing people camping and traveling. I'm on a journey right now back east again, and I was just on the interstate yesterday, and it was just a sea of RVs on the interstate. Not the ones being delivered to dealerships, but actually people using them, going someplace to go camping with those RVs. So it's nice to see that the resiliency of our industry is showing forth right now in the face of all the noise that is out there. And that I just want to set in everybody's mind, it's getting noisy again, and we're now going into these midterm elections, and then we have a ramp up into the presidential election. I'm already banking on 2.5 years of nuts. So enjoy the summer. It's only going to get crazier.
One of the things that I found really interesting over the last few weeks was the impact that the airlines strike and people, and all the different cancellation of flights and all that, and how that had an immediate impact on reservations in campgrounds. So for all the different people I work with that are providing stats back to us, we also did a really quick, 3,000 person survey, and people were saying that before what happened with the airlines, they were considering selling their rig. Now they're scared again, and they're keeping their rigs because they want to be able to vacation, and they're not going to trust the airlines. And so that was another really good thing for our industry, right? I hate it for the airline industry, but I love it for us because it's giving people those reasons to keep those campers and keep camping.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add before I'll throw in a random topic if nobody else has anything?
I got one. If you don't mind.
Yeah.
Ruben, a question for you, good sir. With the glamping industry, I kind of have this thesis that during economic down times, it isn't just that makes you decide to go this way or that, although sometimes it is. It's how the economy in general. Do I feel like a confident consumer? Gas being part of it, inflation being another huge part of that. Do you think there's more glamping segment as there is in RV outdoor hospitality to make have a very good experience once they do arrive? Is the emphasis on even greater than maybe it was without an economic crisis?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And I think, that could definitely transition over to all of outdoors in general and what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years with that volatility that Mark's talking about, because we talk about, looming recession, we talk about gas prices, we talk about all these things that are unknowns. So I like to just pivot back to what is known. right? Business travel has bounced back a little bit, but not 100%. International travel has bounced back a bit, but not 100%. And people are still gravitating towards that hyper local travel, eating the gas prices, knowing that, hey, it's better than hopping on a flight and going to Paris at the moment, right? So I think what we've seen in the space on our end, which has been interesting, is that there has still been a wide variety of average daily rate or price points that people are charging. Right? Some glamping operations, you charge $35, $45 a night, and some are $35,000 a night, and then everywhere in between. And so as the outdoors continues to grow at a rapid pace, I think the theme that I keep seeing is that the outdoors is still proven not to be this recession proof, but still recession resilient, right? We've kind of heard that time and time again, which everybody's excited about. And yeah, does it keep people there? Do you have the extra experiences and add-ons that people can pay for? Are there cost-effective avenues in kind of unique travel, everything in the outdoors? Yeah. But I think it'll be interesting to see what happens here in the next year or so, right? There's just tremendous amount of movement. You have a lot of people who transition to the outdoors, right? People who are used to hotel stays that said, I haven't been camping in a long time. I don't know why I haven't been doing this. And they went 5 times this summer already, right? And now, sure, they're not going to go camping for every one of their vacations, but it's now part of their repertoire, right? Now they're building it back in. And so that is something that I'll keep a close eye on, is if you take 10 vacations a year, if that makes sense. And what does that do for the price point? So yeah, we're still seeing a lot of people who are doing that hyper local travel, driving a few hours and doing that more consistently. And then as the work from anywhere thing still continues to shake itself out. Every day companies are saying, hey, we're going back in the office, and every day there's companies saying we're 100% work from anywhere. So those operations that can provide a strong Wi-Fi working environment will be very interesting to track as well. So yeah.
I want to work from a sailboat. It's totally irrelevant, but I was reading. I read it was The Verge. I read as tech news, and there was a podcast that I read a summary of. They were talking about working from a sailboat and working from anywhere with Starlink and generators and solar power, and it really is possible today. So
it is possible.
I am part of a Facebook group of campers here in Alberta, and there's a gentleman in there that posted the other day a thank you letter to Elon Musk for Starlink, so that he can camp for the rest of his life and still work. So
you know what?
But he can't work for Elon, because Elon wants them all to come in the office. So it's like a catch-22. But anyway, go ahead, Mark.
Keep Starlink alive.
I was going to add on to that, because I did a post back when that Starlink announced that they had the RV plan. That is the most significant improvement in our industry ever, and it's not related to our industry. It's connectivity, because connectivity creates opportunities for people to go on the road and to travel and to spend a lot of time on the road. Our industry, this goes back to the original conversation. Our industry will drastically change over the next 5 to 10 years, drastically. The amount of people that'll be camping and traveling, and not doing it just for vacations, but maybe doing it as part of their lifestyle, part of their travel plans, is going to increase. I'll go on the record and say that it's going to increase, and it's going to change the way our industry works, the way parks work, the way pricing plans, the way you price your sites is going to change. And so we just see a lot of change coming down the road as a result of one thing: connectivity.
Well, and we've talked about briefly, we won't get into it again, but we talked to the Cyberlander guys, right? About how they have, it's the add-on for the Cybertruck that you can go camping in, and has, recyclable water and solar panels and electricity and all that kind of stuff. And we talked to them about how, yes, we have interest from camping, but we also have interest from soccer moms to have a clean bathroom, and from people who are working from home to park outside in nature. And so we've speculated before, what if you can rent a campsite for half a day and go work, and people can sit at your campground midweek when you don't have those sites filled, and they can look at your pond or your nature or your trees or whatever else. And you're talking about more of these electric vehicle companies are popping up, not just for Tesla, but imagine why do you have to be either a hotel or a camping guest? Why can't you be, why can't you travel in your Cybertruck or your electric vehicle and camp on the way to a hotel or the way to a resort, and then camp on the way back, or vice versa? I think there's a lot of things that are going to come out of these innovations that we can't even begin to imagine yet.
Well, I will say, according to the recent tests of the Ford Lightning, you really can't go camping with that thing and tow anything anywhere. So we're still a few years off from that.
Randy and I were, I don't know if my internet's going bad again, but Randy and I were discussing that in a Slack channel, about the Ford Lightning and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like they're coming out with a 2023 model in October, and hopefully you guys can hear me and I'm not pausing, but in October of 2023, they're going to start, or this year on October, they're going to start production of the 2023 model. Cars innovate very quickly. Batteries are going to innovate very quickly. Like I think it's very plausible that a third party comes out with an add-on battery that you can tie in through the tow pack. Maybe even some of these electric RVs come with batteries that can link into that too. And it's really it's not a torque or a pulling issue. It's a battery, the longevity issue. And that's not too hard to solve.
It's always been a battery.
Randy disagrees.
It's all a battery thing, I think. And that's Brian and I were trading jobs yesterday, and I said, according to this Motor Trend study, I'd love to spend $100,000 on a truck that will go 100 miles only while towing something, and an hour and a half to charge back up. That sounds like value. I'm thinking to myself, my thing saying, so your $100,000 truck today, I'm going to buy for $30,000 on a lot that's full with them next year. The technology is going to run laps around you. It's going to take the form of a pager. At some point, today's technology is going to be speedily outdated.
Well, yeah, to be sure, nobody's saying it's ready now, but there are once we have a fast charging network and we build that stuff up, it's gonna scale quickly. They've said, I watched after you posted that, Randy, some videos about the Ford Lightning being able to quick charge up to 80% in 40 some minutes. And again, that you have to use a quick charger. You can't plug it in at a campsite or a regular place, but these things are going to expand. And so yes, it's not there yet, but I don't think it's quite as far off as people imagine it is.
Well, if you go that route, though, the big problem you have there, though, is where is that electricity coming from?
Yeah.
When you've got a reduction in power plants, a reduction in transmission, you can't. California is having brownouts. If you can't charge the car, it ain't going anywhere. So, I agree with you. There's obviously some interest in going down that route. I personally believe right now there's no tangible steps being taken other than banning gas vehicles that are going to move us down that route, if that makes sense, right? So it's one thing to say, hey, everybody has to buy an electric car by 2030, but if you're not permitting power generation, if you're not building those power generation plants, if you're not improving the infrastructure, who cares? I'm going to have an electric car that's sitting in the lot because I can't charge it.
With 12 batteries on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many batteries it's got.
Yeah, I'd rather not buy the bag phone the year before the iPhone appeared, right? I wouldn't have that really cool brick when next year comes the iPhone. I'm not anti-electric. Stretch the imagination. It's going to happen. It's all coming. I just think way too early to spend that much on something that is ethical as it's being portrayed in real life. I don't think we're anywhere close to the ubiquitous kind of action that a lot of folks are forecasting. But that's just me.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
A lot of people spend a lot of money on a lot more stupid things, but we'll see what happens.
They're buying them. The Cyberlander was pre-sold. He had a few hundred units pre-sold, and they're not even in manufacture yet. So they're buying this stuff already. There's a market already. It's coming.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'll be a year 3 buyer, not a year 1 buyer.
Yeah. Okay.
Year 3 is not that far away, Randy. I'm just saying. We're going to hold you to that. We're going to play this recording for you in October of 2025 or 4. Yeah, October of 2023 actually will be year 3 when they start production. So you don't have too long here, Randy. We're going to play the recording back for you, and you're going to have to buy one.
Yeah, but to that point, if say that happens in 2 years, Brian, if they're able to get the range up to 250, 300 miles towing, electric vehicles beat gas vehicles all day long. You got instant torque, all that power. So if that's a possibility, you would see a massive shift immediately. So,
Which is great.
If that happens.
Yeah, it would
well, again, I don't think and I'm so sorry, I'm just lagging here. So if I'm overlapping somebody, I look like I'm choppy on my end. So hopefully I'm coming through on your end fine.
You're clear on ours.
I think that the answer is not necessarily going to be quick for Ford putting a bigger battery on the Ford Lightning. But I think that you see some of these electric vehicle and RV camping manufacturers and even third-party just sell a battery pack you can sit in the bed of your truck or whatever that can connect to the tow and expand the, like, I think there's going to be third-party vendors outside of Ford. And I think that's the quickest path.
Well, and in the meantime, we have to be able to help educate our parks and equip them on how to handle this. Because I've already had a park that couldn't have a better infrastructure, where people have come in with their electric cars, decided to plug up on the post to charge their car. And when they did, they went inside and tried to run the microwave and do other things. And guess what? The refrigerator went out, because they're not designed to be able to run all that power. And so parks need to be equipped and educated on, how do you handle somebody who comes in and tries to plug their car in? Not all the power is clean power. If it damages the car because they plugged into your post, what's going to happen? And those are the things we need to be educating our parks on, or some national organization or some state organization, right? Doing that to help them get prepared along the way until all this is ready.
It's a good idea, Sandy. We should create a task force to create standards for electric vehicles across the industry.
But in order to give me one of the new Lightnings, I'll head up the task force.
Sandy signed up. That goes back to the power provider, the amount of power available. In my park, I had 200 sites and plenty of transformers. And in the peak of July, when it's 40 degrees Celsius, sorry guys, I don't know what that is for you. We were blackout. We had blackouts all the time. I mean, the idea that my 250 amp sites are throwing things off now. I mean, our parks are going to need support to make that transition, no question.
There's this middle ground, right?
Absolutely.
Campgrounds are coming up this way to handle electric. Electric is finally starting to go this way. Those two worlds are heat, but neither world is there yet. Parks aren't ready for them, and the vehicles aren't there. There's a few year gap before this becomes really. You start planning now, obviously. There's no question about that. Parks planned for yesterday, no doubt about it. But we're in that nebulous zone in between those two worlds, I think. And Brian, to your point about the task force, I would say yes, as long as the press release is going to talk about stuff, and we'll get back to you. That's all the press release needs to say, because it's self-evident.
No, I think if they said that, we would be on here saying, what are they going to talk about? What are they going to talk about?
It's interesting, though.
It's true. Speculation is entertaining. Sorry, Casey, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, with the charging stations, it's interesting because a lot of the charging stations currently, they have attached themselves to hotels. Like, hotels have 100% said, this is where we see this going, and we want to be. I mean, I personally have stayed at hotels because it's en route to a kid's baseball game that I can plug in at. Like, I've used it multiple times only because of that reason. I got to imagine there's some data around, the value of adding that type of charging station and the revenue that it's going to potentially bring to that, or maybe it's supplementing with the restaurants that are around there. Because again, you're charging for 40 minutes. What do? You're going to eat. You're going to sit there and flip through your phone or whatever. But you're looking for a destination where you can charge at some point overnight, and hotels, they are taking advantage of it. I mean, it's a matter of, is there campgrounds that are on some of these interstates that are kind of these overnight aspects of things? You can charge for it, right? It's not like you can't charge for it. It's just a matter of, do they want to invest in it? Because it will become relevant, because as much as I hate always comparing hotels to the camping industry, I think the camping industry is so much better and so much more unique, and there's so many more cool things. And within it, the fact that they have taken, they have made a massive investment in it over the last 10 years. I think parks there's an opportunity there, because then they're staying there overnight, hopefully, right? And you're getting that business that way.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes back to the whole idea of policing things that Ruben brought back, because a lot of my parks are experiencing now is people come in with their electric cars. They don't know it's an electric car or not. They don't watch them as they come in. Then they go plug up at the post. That post is not metered. And so now their profit margin is reduced because they're charging their electric car. So even if nothing happens, even if there's no brownout, no damage, it still lowered their costs. Now you take that across multiple sites as they become more popular. And so parks don't want to have to go out and police it. They don't know what to do or how to talk to that guest. They're trying to give good guest experience, but they hate to go out and say, hey, you can't plug up at that post. I'm not charging you for that. Right? So
I think that'll be a big topic this year at Arvik, will be kind of this metered post thing. You know, is everyone going to move to that? Like, is everyone, do you have to do that in order to have a profitable business? I mean, I don't think it's quite there yet, but that's probably something that eventually, you know, that's going to become a pretty relevant topic too.
All right. I think we got to wrap up, guys. Great conversation as always. We could probably take it another hour if we really wanted to, but we're a little bit over an hour, and I know all of you have other important things to do besides sitting here and chatting with us. So I apologize for my internet connection today. I was in and out. I didn't get a chance in the beginning to thank our sponsor for the show, which is Fireside Accounting. I don't know if their banner is going to come up in front of us here. Hopefully it does. For whatever reason, I'm still choppy on the back end over here, but super grateful for Fireside Accounting for sponsoring this episode. We kind of say it always, right? But as you go through different milestones and different events in the course of your park, it's always the best time to get an expert accountant on your team. But like now we've got inflation, and now we've got new tax laws and all those kinds of things. And so bringing somebody in like Lindsay and her team is always a good idea. They just know the industry and all the ins and outs and can probably help you save quite a significant amount of money on your taxes and do your bookkeeping properly. So again, thank you for accounting. Any final thoughts from anybody before we head out?
Have a good week.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
thanks, guys.
I don't know. It's super choppy for me. So, but thank you guys. I really appreciate it again. Ruben, can we announce what we're going to do next week? Is it a thing, or should we hold off? All right. So next week we normally do theme shows. If you guys are unaware, the first week of the month is the campground discussion show that we're having right now. The second week of the month is unthemed. The third is the campground owners, and the fourth is RV industry. And then once in a while we have a fifth that's terrible because I can't get enough guests for it because it's randomly unplanned. But the second week we're going to focus on a glamping themed episode going forward. And so Ruben is going to shift from the open discussion show. He's going to join us on the second week going forward. He'll be here next week too, and then every second week going forward. And we're currently putting together a roster of really cool glamping experts, owners, people like that who can really dive into the glamping trends and things like that. So we're excited to launch that next week, see where that goes. I'm really excited for that. So other than that, we got to get out of here. 2.5 minutes over. Thank you guys. Really appreciate you watching and joining us for another episode here. Hopefully my internet will be better next week, and we'll see you all then.
Bye.
Thanks for watching this episode of MC Fireside Chats, hosted by Brian Searl and Cara Csizmadia. Have a suggestion for a future show or want to see your campground or company as part of an episode? Email us at hello@moderncampground.com. Join us next week for another episode. And don't miss the latest outdoor hospitality news and commentary from around the world at moderncampground.com.